Probably to show us what we're really like as human beings, rather than lovers. I think we're more villains. And I think that one of the frightening things is how much we recognise in a character such as Iago ourselves. So, yeah, I think it's something to do with that. We see something of ourselves in the villains.
Dramatically, they're more appealing, aren't they, than heroes or kind of...
Devil has the best tunes.
Absolutely.
I think they're also about creating tension, aren't they, within the plot. Something's got to be resolved around the villain. Do they win, do they lose, and how do they lose?
And they tend to lose, don't they?
Well, I was going to say, who wins?
Well, that's a good question.
Well, Iago doesn't die at the end. There's a sort of sense that at the end of Othello, although he doesn't win, does he lose?
Does he get away with it?
Does he get away with it? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, he's silenced, isn't
Yeah.
he? He doesn't say anything else.
No.
And given that his whole villainy is wrapped up in the corrosive nature of words,
Yeah.
it's a kind of defeat, isn't it? That he's actually silent.
I don't know. I think he just says, "That's it. I'm not going to talk anymore," and he doesn't.
So job done, perhaps.
Yeah, done.
Yeah, there's no form of punishment, is there? Or there doesn't seem to be...
Well, we're denied it.
Yeah, yeah.
So to some extent, it is a victory of sorts. You know.
Some of them don't get away with it. Richard III, for instance, he loses it all.
And Claudius, of course, doesn't get away with it. Tries very hard, lasts to the end, but yeah, dies in that marvellous bloodbath at the end of Hamlet.
How much do we want them to get away with it anyway? I mean, you know, it comes back to the original point. Do we want to see these villains killed on stage before us? And how do we feel if we're denied that pleasure?
And to your point as well about the tension, you want things to be upset, but you want them to be resolved before you go home, before you leave the theatre.
Well, it's more comfortable, isn't it? Yeah. Well, I suppose we do, don't we? But whether they're resolved in death, which happens most of the time, doesn't it? I mean, Iago's situation is unusual, I think.
There are a few problem characters. There's Shylock as well in The Merchant of Venice, which to a modern eye is not so much a villain, more of a victim, and he meets a similar fate to Iago.
Yeah, I mean, that was the first play I think I ever studied when I was doing O-levels, and I've always been conflicted about Shylock. Have you ever taught it?
Yes.
Yes.
You taught it. And how did the students respond to it?
I think it's very difficult to divorce modern sensibility from one's appreciation of the character or a modern interpretation of the character. There is a certain element that you can't deny history, you can't go back on what people think these days, and particularly as the character is a Jew as well, I think.
Yeah.
Post the Second World War, post the Holocaust, there's a lot of kind of baggage with that character.
I found that most of the teaching time was around Shylock, actually. Everything else, all the other plot twists and turns were really quite uninteresting to the pupils, in fact, in comparison.
And there is that sense about villains as well, with Iago, who is the main character in Othello.
Yeah, well, he has more lines than Othello.
Yeah.
I was just thinking when you were talking about how sometimes teachers' expectations or preconceptions or inherited assumptions about the villains that they're teaching sometimes are at odds with the students' responses. You know, so do we try to convey a certain impression? Or, you know, because we've studied this place lots and lots of times, taught it lots and lots of times. You know, we talked about Lady Macbeth earlier and Macbeth, and to what extent the students differ from our views of these characters. And I wonder whether that some of those villains, we as fully grown adults appreciate the complexities and what they've gone through and what they're thinking and why they're acting in that way, in a way that young people don't, thankfully. Be worrying if a 13-year-old empathises completely with Iago. Not that I do. I don't empathise with him at all. But I sympathise with his view, because he is described as having motiveless malignity, isn't he? But he thinks he has two motives. He suspects that, or at least he thinks that Othello slept with his wife, and he's being passed over for promotion. Two very good reasons for attacking the boss. And to some extent that makes him more understandable.
But sometimes I think you find the pupils have a really visceral response, which perhaps we've lost as adults to a particular character. As you were saying earlier about Lady Macbeth, how quickly often they respond negatively to her.
Well, they don't expect women to behave like that.
Yes. Well, why is that? Is that just because that hasn't come within the range of their experience yet, or is it a shock?
Well, it's interesting to challenge them, actually, about that, and it leads to some interesting conversations, but you also have to stop yourself, as a teacher, challenging those prejudices sometimes.
I suppose in children's literature, the villain, the characters are more black and white, aren't they?
Well, they have the evil stepmother.
Yes.
I mean, there's Lady Macbeth, always like that character, the witch or the evil stepmother. And in the same play you have the three witches, of course.
Yes.
And so women don't come out of that play very well, really, apart from Lady Macbeth. We strayed away from villains, haven't we? We're on to Lady Macbeth now. Well, I went first last time. I'll go first again. Well, I'm gonna go for Iago again. I've taught Othello lots and lots of times, and I've never really tired of teaching it. Other teachers feel it's quite an unbalanced play. Iago dominates to such an extent, but he is magnetic, and somebody described him as a sort of moral pyromaniac. He just likes destroying stuff for the sheer pleasure of destroying it. So I find him, going back to my first point, more charismatic, interesting, and tells us something I suppose we don't want to hear about ourselves.
And do you find him constantly interesting? The fact that you've taught the play so many times, and you come back to him and you can't pluck out the heart of his mystery.
Well, yeah, I think he benefits from being on the same stage a lot of the time with Othello, who is probably arguably the weakest of those tragic heroes. That domestic tragedy, and Othello is often just a fool, an idiot, and almost deserves to get treated in that way by Iago, because just Iago can do that. So yeah, I mean, I think that, but he is so changeable and so different and so complex, and it's just tremendous fun. Acting it out in the classroom, doing just a flat text analysis, you can have great fun with Othello and with Iago, and the children enjoy that. They're just appalled by how brutal he can be.
Dramatically, Othello never draws you in either.
No, he doesn't.
He doesn't share anything with you. He's always the public character.
Yeah.
And
except I think when he says, there's one line where he says, "Oh, the pity of it, Iago, the pity." And I just find that intensely moving. It's as if, why is life like this? Why is it doing this to me? Just every now and again there are lines in the plays which are very simple, very straightforward, but every student can get them, and they just stand out as being intensely or viscerally moving. And that's one line, just, "Oh, the pity of it, Iago."
And it's the splendid contrast between the kind of language Iago uses as well, which is often very precise, and Othello's much more highfalutin poetic language, that I think makes the play so dramatic as well.
And it resonates. We're talking a lot about Othello, but if you're watching the House of Cards at the moment, you can see those shots to camera, and you just think that's Iago.
Or Richard III.
Or Richard
because
III,
he would be my favourite.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Why?
Because whether it's historically accurate or not, Shakespeare makes him very appealing, and yet physically he's repulsive. He shouldn't be an appealing character, and yet he is. He shares his private thoughts with you. He draws you in. He tells you that he's going to win over the Lady Anne, and then does right in front of you, and you can't quite believe it. And it's almost...
So you feel part of the plot.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
In the same way that maybe because Iago draws you in and tells you what's about to happen. You're almost complicit with these characters, and the poor heroes, or the good characters in inverted commas, they're less inclusive. They don't really involve you in their plots.
When you teach that play, does that disfigurement, that twisted body and twisted mind, how do the students respond to that?
Again, it's one of these things which I think is rather difficult to divorce from modern thoughts. Does it make him actually, to a modern audience, a much more sympathetic character, whereby people think, well, he almost has a motive because of the way he's been treated. And I'm not entirely sure that Shakespeare doesn't suggest some of that himself by some of the comments that he talks about, where he said, because I was the way he's been born, etc.
Well, I think there's probably some links with him and Claudius, who is my villain, in the sense, but Claudius doesn't draw you in, does he? I mean, he is very much the public face, and so good at that. I think that's why I admire him, in spite of what you find out later on is real personal turmoil when he tries to pray and he can't, and he finds that his sin is constantly with him. But when I teach Hamlet, I find that he's a very recognisable figure from, dare one say, in modern politics. The sense of the public face, but actually the corruption lying behind. And of course there's all that wonderful imagery about subjuration in Hamlet. So although he doesn't draw you in, and after all what he's done has happened before the play starts, I admire him. I think I admire his ability to function, having done that.